Hey, everybody, on this episode of The Charlie Kirk Show, it's one of my favorite conversations I've had for quite some time. So get a pen, get some paper, get ready to take some notes for a big picture conversation, what's happening in our country with Steve Deace. He is the author of Faucian Bargain, great book. If this podcast has blessed you in any way, please consider supporting us, like Grace from Hawaii, who supports us, or Trevor from Georgia, who says, thank you for the podcasts you and your team put together. The info and standpoint is unreal. Thanks again. Thank you, Trevor. And thank you for blessing us at charliekirk.com/support. Denny from Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Thank you. Paul from Telford, Pennsylvania. Thank you. And I also want to thank Luis from Staten Island. He says, Charlie, I'm a conservative Catholic and combat disabled veteran from Staten Island, New York. I've been listening to you for a while now, and I believe you are doing God's work. We need more young people like you. I'm doing everything I possibly can to support you, and it's extremely disconcerting for me to watch everything crumble around me. I want to help you, your cause any way you can. Thanks so much. And that's why he's supporting us at charliekirk.com/support. I want to thank Christina from Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you want this podcast to be listened to and these ideas to be understood by more students, it's charliekirk.com/support. Email me directly, freedom@charliekirk.com. And also, if you want to get involved with Turning Point USA, you can do so at tpusa.com. And guess what? AmFest tickets are available for some of the biggest speakers you can imagine in Phoenix, Arizona, December 18, 19, 20, 21 at tpusa.com/AmFest, tpusa.com/AmFest.com. Thank you again for supporting us at charliekirk.com/support. I forgot one other person I wanted to thank, and that is Rob from Tennessee for your very generous support. charliekirk.com/support. Steve Deace is here. Do we have the will to win? Buckle up. Here we go.
Charlie, what you've done is incredible here.
Maybe Charlie Kirk is on the college campus.
I want you to know we are lucky to have Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk's running the White House, folks.
I want to thank Charlie. He's an incredible guy. His spirit, his love of this country. He's done an amazing job building one of the most powerful youth organizations ever created, Turning Point USA.
We will not embrace the ideas that have destroyed countries, destroyed lives, and we are going to fight for freedom on campuses across the country. That's why we are here.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Charlie Kirk Show. With us today is Steve Deace, author of Faucian Bargain, a great book that you should check out. And I have a lot I want to pick his brain on. But, Steve, welcome back to The Charlie Kirk Show.
It's a pleasure to be back with you, Charlie. And again, congrats on your success, brother. Happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you have a new chapter to your Faucian book. Some would call it a booster shot. Is that right?
Yes, it's called Faucian Booster. And it just came out yesterday, in fact. And the goal is to help and equip people to push back on vaccine mandates. We go into a lot of data. We look at this strictly from a medical ethics and a scientific ethical perspective, because we don't frankly think that the people making these decisions will be moved by constitutionality at all. They view the Constitution as something to erase, run over, undo. So we try to appeal to something more Hippocratic, more directly Judeo-Christian. We appealed to the Nuremberg Code, which came out after World War II in response to using humans as test subjects to try to reset what medical and scientific and experimental ethics are supposed to look like. And a lot of the data that we use, Charlie, I thought it was funny. I had some spirit of the age lefties come at me on Twitter this morning, wondering if I had quoted a bunch of people that had just been banned on YouTube. Not that that means anything anymore, but a lot of these were names I'd never even heard of. No, I didn't quote any of them. I actually use almost exclusively CDC and WHO data in this chapter. So it's available right now for digital download. It's only a couple of bucks. I'm going to make like 40 cents a copy. This is really just about getting this information to people, as many as we can, to push back on these vaccine mandates.
So talk about the Nuremberg aspect of that, because that's something that people have been messaging me, and it's widely debunked that this is against the Nuremberg Code. Is it?
No, it's not, actually. So for people that don't know, Nuremberg, of course, were the trials that were held after World War II. But to kind of set that scene, Charlie, I think a lot of people don't realize that many of the Allies had no idea the extent of the ghoulish ghastliness going on within Germany. Before World War I, Charlie, Germany was the most technologically advanced country on the earth.
Yes.
And by the time we get to the end of World War II, they basically are a militaristic, authoritarian island of Dr. Moreau. And so there were a lot of rumors. Obviously, they had smuggled Jews out of Israel. Out of Nazi Germany. So there were rumors about what was going on, but the level and extent of the experimentations, the sterilizations, the executions, the purgings, they really didn't know until after the war. So they chose Nuremberg, which was the site of many of Hitler's most notorious propaganda rallies. They specifically chose it to symbolize that this was the end of this. We would never open Pandora's box again. We would never, ever do this again. They put out a series of 10 principles about how to reset scientific advancement back to sort of its Hippocratic Judeo-Christian roots. And we only look at the very first one, which is kind of the prime directive. And we go through it line by line, and we point out why COVID vaccine mandates violate the very first principle, every word of it, of the Nuremberg Code.
Well, let's go into some detail if you can without, everyone go buy the book first, Fauci and Bargain.
Sure.
But to talk about that a little bit, as to use a Star Trek, I guess, example of the prime directive of non-interference of intergalactic civilization. What is the prime directive of the Nuremberg Codes?
So let me go find the exact wording here. I've got it in front of me in my notes. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. That's the very first principle. And we go through this line by line and show how this violates it, and especially if you get to the very last one, the sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved. And we point out things I don't think a lot of Americans know. I don't think a lot of Americans even know what mRNA stands for, that it stands for messenger RNA. I don't think a lot of Americans know that really major pharmaceutical companies did not begin investing heavily in this technology until 2008. I don't think they realized that it's actually been around since the late 1970s. No one, though, could figure out how to harness it. We haven't mass injected it into humans ever until now. I don't think a lot of people know that Moderna, when you look at efficacy numbers, it's actually the most effective of the vaccines in producing antibodies. But Moderna had tried to bring nine, let me repeat that, nine previous products to market before COVID, including just weeks before COVID, ended up closing the world down. And they were 0 for 9 in making those products successful enough to come to market. In fact, only one of them even got so far as mass human trial. I don't think a lot of people know that Merck, maybe the largest pharmaceutical company in the country, discontinued its Operation Warp Speed quest for a COVID vaccine because they were not satisfied with the efficacy numbers compared to side effects that they were seeing in human trials. This is a lot of information that I think a lot of people don't know. And I can guarantee you, Charlie, that when a lot of people got jabbed in January and February and March thinking this is our deliverance, let's do this and get beyond this, they probably didn't know that they were going to be actually now test subjects in an ongoing experiment of continued injection and re-injection. Charlie, if people with the profiles you and I have, if we had gone online on Twitter or Facebook in January, February, and March and said, we really don't believe that these vaccines are going to have long-lasting efficacy. You're looking at a third booster by the end of the year at the absolute latest, and they certainly aren't going to work to stop mass transmission of the virus. Charlie, you and I would have been banned off every major platform in this country if we had said that. And yet, when you look at the data and you look at what's going on, that is exactly where we are at in real time.
I've been telling you guys about Relief Factor for quite some time. And truth is, I know millions of people are, in fact, 100 million people are in some kind of pain. Look, producer Andrew, he couldn't walk. He was a hobbled individual. He was bedridden in his chair, complaining all the time. And then all of a sudden we got this call from Relief Factor. They said, hey, we want to partner with your show. We're going to send you some Relief Factor. Producer Andrew got it. He took it, got a little bit better, took some more, got a little bit better. Next thing you know, he's doing the Fallsbury flop like you wouldn't believe. In fact, he might be training for an Ironman. It's pretty incredible. Now, he says it's thanks to Relief Factor. I ask him all the time, Relief Factor? He says relieffactor.com, 100% drug-free supplement. You can get it for less than the cost of a cup of coffee a day. So go to relieffactor.com, And I'm suggesting you order their 3-week quick start to see if we can get you out of pain. And then after that, it's less than the cost of a cup of coffee a day to stay out of pain. Go to relieffactor.com. That is relieffactor.com. I'm telling you, a lot of people are in pain. It's 100% drug-free. Don't go to opioids. Don't go to these other things. Check it out at relieffactor.com. Yeah, and I want to ask you about this because you do a lot on the right. Why are so many conservatives peddling the vaccine? Like people that I used to trust and listen to. I'm not going to say any names. You know who I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. These people say they all care about facts, and yet it just is really bizarre to me. Is it wishful thinking? Is it not looking at the data? Are they afraid of being called names? It's been really strange.
It's a combination of factors. One is there is an element of people in our business whose monetization model derives largely from a platform like a Facebook. Mm-hmm. And so what you'll find if you go and look at their commentary on things that you don't get pinged on Facebook for, I mean, they go to the wall, the mattresses on those things. On the things that you would get pinged on Facebook for, like say election integrity or this conversation, they have nothing to say. I think that's part of it. I think also there is an element within our movement, and I say this as someone that probably was counted himself amongst this group until a few years ago when I could no longer deny the ferocity of just the pagan zealotry that we are up against. Yes. But there is still an element of our movement that is concerned about what our base will do if they don't kind of rein them in. That will all be, certified nuts, crazy, banned everywhere. That will be, disinvited from polite society. So somebody, some really smart people have got to kind of run the Overton window on the right. I think that's part of it. I think it's also that they think we're still doing conventional science here, and that there were some very prevalent people in our industry that were promoting Scott Gottlieb last year as a legitimate spokesperson. Okay. And I think it comes down to, we can still all work together and live together here if we have, people that are these people don't exist any longer. No one is objective any longer. You're in a culture that's in a cold civil war. And I'm sorry, it sucks. I'm not, I'm a father of 3 kids. I'm not really happy about what that means for the future, but I can't lie to myself about that any longer either. And then I just think that there are people that just are frauds. Now, who fits into which of those camps and how many? I think it's a variation on a theme, and you'd probably have to do it on a case by case basis.
No, that's very helpful. And it's been really puzzling to me because I've really never cared about the vaccine issue until it started caring about me. And
exactly.
I publicly declared I wasn't getting the vaccine, and all of a sudden I became some sort of villain. And I mean, people used to come up to me at these events with these massive packets of how vaccines gave their kids autism, and I never dismissed it, and I never took it serious. I was like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, that's your passion in life. And I'm not even getting into that aspect of this, right? But all of a sudden, I now have to go take this vaccine despite having natural immunity and, being 27 years old and not at all ever having a concern of dying from this virus. And the fact that I'm now advocating for medical freedom, it's somehow controversial. So we launched this no forced vax thing back in July. And Steve, it was crickets on the right in certain the institutional think tanks because either they take money from pharmaceutical companies or they're corrupted by them. And I just want to applaud you, Steve. I mean, you've taken a position against the medical industrial regime and Fauci and all these different kind of interests. And so talk about how powerful this really is, because what you're talking about here is not just the federal government, CDC, NIH, but you're also saying, wait a second, like we as conservatives, we don't have to go put on like a bunch of Pfizer jerseys and act like these people are on our team.
Right. And I think, there was a notion until recently that America was overdue for a political realignment, that they typically happen on a generational basis. And the last one we had is, I think, probably before you were born and when I was just a little kid, and it was spurred on by Roe v. Wade. And this is what made Catholics consider voting Republican for the first time ever. Evangelicals became a mobilized political force for the first time ever. They became, and these two groups that spent 500 years not talking to each other post-Reformation suddenly aligned in what became the religious right. And I think people have been like, we're way overdue for a new political realignment. We did have it, Charlie. It happened in corporate America.
Yes.
In the 90s, our social conservative groups could have gone to a company like Target, for example, and gotten them to donate money to put a marriage amendment on the ballot in the state of Minnesota.
Totally.
Then we got into the 2000s, and companies like Target then became neutral. They didn't want to get involved at all. And now that we're into the 2010s, they're actually now aligned against us. It is very, very rare. The Lee Iacocca kind of American CEO is largely gone. Many of these are men and women that come from the same indoctrination centers as the people you're watching on fake cable news and in academia. And so, the Wells Fargo and companies like this, they're not getting shaken down by Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton anymore. Let me just give you some money to go away and leave me alone. They're true believers.
Yes.
They're funding this evangelistically. And I think what a massive element within the right is having a hard time with is coming to grips with the fact that corporate America is an opponent by and large, with few exceptions. And they don't want to admit this. And so they say stupid things like, well, I think a private business can do whatever they want. I don't know. Marijuana is legal. Can a private business tell me I've got to be stoned? I got to go puff, puff, pass in order to come in and shop at Walmart? Can they do that to me? Can they tell their employees they have to be stoned? Alcohol is legal everywhere. Can they tell their employees that are alcoholics, hey, you've got to have a couple of beers before you can come in here and work here today? Of course they can't do things like that. Yeah. Of course businesses can't do whatever they want. But this is a struggle of, and this is happening not just for a long time. I think we fantasized that it was only the left that didn't want to accept the truth, even if it was true, because it was inconvenient to their narrative. More and more in recent years, you have seen this is occurring on the right. We don't want, and this is just kind of systemic. We're in a post-truth era in America.
Yes.
People don't want to accept things are true unless it affirms their narrative or it's convenient for them to do so.
Well, I think that's totally right. And there's no escaping that. It's just a question of who's going to win. And we're going to get to one of the things I really want to talk to you about, where you really piqued my curiosity last time, and I wrote it down and I've mentioned a lot, was that we're a nation of political will, not of laws. We're going to get to that in a second, because that really got me interested. I want to ask you this question, though, which is, do you think that the cult of science, as Dwight D. Eisenhower would say, there's this great quote that we need to remember. I love Eisenhower, even though some people on the right don't, which I find to be really weird. This deepening dependence on the scientific technological elite is an inescapable condition, one that knows no party or ideology. He said that right before the military-industrial complex warning.
Right.
People don't remember that. Talk about how, if you make science absent morality the absolute goal, this kind of cult of German historicism, that will lead to the ultimate abuse of power that we know on the planet. That science as a tool used morally can be very helpful. Germ theory, very basic things. But science as an end, what does that look like?
It looks like a dystopia. It looks like the conversations we're having now. It looks like if Nietzsche wrote an end times novel, that's what it looks like. And what's fascinating about all of this is, if you look at a lot of the pioneers of science historically, on my program, I like to tell my audience there's science and then there's the science, or as the great prophet Thomas Dolby once said, science. All right. And the latter two are frankly just things that are monetizable for the acquisition of political power and the furthering of political narratives. Mm-hmm. The first one is a process and an objective search for truth and human advancement. It's just we rarely do that first one anymore. But if you go look at a lot of the Western pioneers of science, you're going to find a lot of them were driven by their own Christian faith, Newton, or were driven to prove Christian curiosities about the origins of the earth. No, we're talking about messenger RNA vaccines right now. All right. So we're talking about genetics. The founder of modern genetics, for example, it was an Augustinian Catholic monk named Gregor Mendel. He's the founder from the 19th century. He's the founder of what we now call genetics. And a lot of the conversations we're having right now about using or tricking or manipulating, whatever word you want to use, human RNA to work similar with the vaccine technology to what traditional vaccines that take much longer to produce, how they work. All these conversations come back to the fact of a branch of science founded by a Catholic religious monk. And now we live in an era where the science predominantly exists in order to prove to humanity that we can be like God, that we don't need a God. We don't need any guidance. We're our own little demigods, small g. And so if you want to know what that looks like, if you want to know what it looks like when a culture has been given over, when you see signs of the death of the West and you see signs that 70% of American men between the ages of 20 and 34 are unmarried with no children.
Yes.
Okay. That's death of the West stuff. How did we get here? It's because Nietzsche was not just a philosopher. He was a prophet. God is dead and we have killed him.
Yeah, and he wasn't celebrating it or proclaiming it.
No, he was not. He was lamenting that. That's the irony of it. Yes.
And in Beyond Good and Evil, he talked very clearly that if the West does not find its own values, you're going to have to create new ones. And Nietzsche's very misunderstood by most people.
Can I address what you just said there? Because I think this is a key point that you just raised.
Of course, sure. I mean, I love Nietzsche.
I think we have been rightly, like on my network, I work with Glenn Beck, for example, and he has been one of the forerunners in going off about postmodernism. I think a lot of Americans probably first heard that term from somebody like him. But I think that there's this idea, though, that postmodernism was meant in and of itself to be a replacement for the old Judeo-Christian plumb line that founded America. And no, it was not. See, this is Animal Farm, all right? And they looked from man to pig and pig to man and back to pig again, and they couldn't tell the difference. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad becomes 4 legs are good, but 2 legs are even better. See, when they unleashed this plague called postmodernism, they never intended, the spirit of the age did not intend for us to live in a truthless society. It did not intend for us to ultimately end up in a secular, religionless society or a valueless society. Yes. That was not the point. It was released in order to destabilize our worldviews, defining of those terms. And once that was done, and once they sucked people into this idea that, yes, by all means, you can live whatever you want, however you want, no consequences at all. Once that is done and the advantage is gained, then you get to the next phase of the operation we're in now, which is meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yes.
This was done with the intent of introducing not a religionless society, but a different religion, not a valueless society, but different values, not a truthless society, but a different truth.
Did you ever read the fine print that appears when you start browsing in incognito mode? It says that your activity might still be visible to your employer, your school, or your internet service provider. How can they even call it incognito? To really stop people from seeing the sites that you visit, you need to do what I do and use ExpressVPN. Think about all the time you've used Wi-Fi at a coffee shop, a hotel, or even at your parents' house. Without ExpressVPN, every site you visit could be logged by the admin of that network. And that's still true even when you're in incognito mode. What's more, your home internet service provider can also see and record your browsing data. In the United States, they're legally allowed to sell that data to advertisers. ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts all of your network data and reroutes it through a network of secure servers so that all your private online activity stays just that, private. ExpressVPN works on all your devices, and it's very easy to use. The app literally has one button. You tap it to connect, and your browsing activity is secure from prying eyes. So stop letting strangers invade your online privacy. Protect yourself right now with the VPN that I trust at expressvpn.com/Charlie. Use my link at expressvpn.com/Charlie to get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/Charlie to learn more. And this is where people get Nietzsche wrong, myself included a couple years ago until I actually really started to read it. And you could derive it from what Nietzsche wrote, obviously, and his own personal opinion was, okay, the West is going to die. We see it falling apart. Really, all we have is the will, and we can build ourselves as human beings to be the Overman or the Ubermensch, whatever you want to call it. And this idea of the will is very empowering to people that reject religion. And I don't think Nietzsche would have been, I think he would have been horrified to realize that the Nazis embraced it and the Soviet Union embraced it separately in their own way.
What was the Nazis' most famous propaganda?
The triumph of the will.
The triumph of the will.
Yes. I mean, and it was the most famous speech, where the most famous propaganda of the Soviet Union was the creating of the overman. It was the Soviet man, the complete man who doesn't want private property, only cares about the state. Anyway, but this idea of the crisis of the West has been percolating for quite some time. Most conservatives have no idea really of this kind of game that's being played around them. But then you mix all this kind of together. I can't really remember how we got onto Nietzsche, but it's really interesting. Because too many conservatives either don't know him or they dismiss him, is that we as conservatives have to realize that this is a values debate, or it used to be, but now it's a debate of the will. This is a perfect segue, right? So this is actually seamless. So you said on the show last time, and you were totally right, that we're no longer a nation of laws, we're a nation of political will. So Nietzsche talked about that, explain that, then I have a provocative question to ask you after that.
So yesterday, I saw the Koch Foundation had announced it is opposed to banning critical race theory.
Yeah.
And I pointed out to my audience that from the time George W. Bush left the White House to the time Donald Trump stepped in, these people, this network is who ran the Republican Party, the conservative movement, conservative media, and the right in America. You could do nothing of any magnitude. If you want to know why your Tea Party got swallowed up whole, it wasn't just grifters within it. It's that even when good people earnestly got elected, they were absolutely devoured by the yeast of the Pharisees over there at the Koch network. And that's why basically how you voted for over 10 years was completely irrelevant. They were in control. And I said, so maybe the only possible solution we have is let's wait for elections that are a year or 3 years off and vote for a bunch of people that didn't save us the last time or the time before that or the time before that. And several people tweeted back to me, well, what is our other solution? And I tweeted back to them this. The Rainbow Jihad lost 31 consecutive elections in this country over the definition of marriage, and yet they now control the culture. Last July of 2020, we sat and watched in about 30 days when an obscure Marxist group almost no one had ever heard of. By the end of the year, the NFL is painting their logos on the field. College teams are wearing their badges. Black Lives Matter without a single vote cast. Went from an obscure Marxist academic group to taking over the culture. And I asked my audience, how did they do it? See, our people don't understand this. They still think what you just said, if we think this is a values debate and it's not, you're exactly right about that. We're saying you can't take our guns. We have the Second Amendment. They're saying, so freaking what? We don't care.
Yes.
All right.
They
don't care.
They have the will.
Yes.
What is this?
That's right.
This document means nothing to them.
That's right. And that's why the Constitution is a social compact. But the way it's working right now is we're using it to bind us. So
that's exactly right.
Can I bring in the election integrity issue for just a second on this as a proof of concept? I had arguments with people that I adore, are great friends of mine, and when the shooting starts, they're going to be some of the first people I call to have my back. Okay. But I was so frustrated with them over the election integrity argument last January because they were so flummoxed because in their view, they thought what Trump was asking Mike Pence to do violated the 8th Amendment. And my response back to them was, it doesn't matter if that's even true, okay? Because if we don't know if the actual votes counted are legitimate, it doesn't matter what the 8th, 1st, 4th, 49th Amendment that we don't even have yet says. The Constitution was not made for us. It was made for us. We were not made for it. Like the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. We predate the Constitution. It begins with the words, we the people. It's a social compact. When one side of the compact violates it, we don't sit there and just hold ourselves to it while the other side is running roughshod over our God-given rights. And we sit here and say, but hey, guys, the ninth line of the 8th Amendment, we don't want to get in the way of that freight train. So we'll just go ahead and let you guys rape, pillage, and plunder as you seek. Well, that's really the argument that's existed on the right for a long time.
Oh, I mean, that's the movement I grew up in. I would have said that 4 years ago. And so but what we're getting into, and I'm already there, and what I think I hear you're saying, as someone who, in the past, I think, Steve, you would have said you have some libertarian leanings. Maybe I'm putting those words in your mouth. I don't know. But like the idea that we as conservatives have to all of a sudden realize we're no longer a nation of laws. It's really who's going to want it more. So
yes.
Here's the provocative question. Is it time for us to say, I don't care. I don't care if Texas doesn't have the federal authority to enforce immigration law.
Yes.
I don't.
Yes is going to be the answer. Yeah.
Okay, so we should.
Yes.
So to say it as provocatively as possible because it's good for ratings.
Yeah. Here's the bottom line. Whoever you just said it. Whoever wants this more, in any negotiation or confrontation, whoever has the least nerves or concern about losing it, and whoever believes that has the most conviction in the righteousness of their cause is going to win. Afghanistan has turned away now the Soviet Union and the United States of America, the two greatest empires in the last 300 years since the British Empire. How did they do it? Because the people there that want to remain in the 8th century of that armpit want that more than the Soviets and the Americans did.
Yes.
That's why. Okay. It's why did we kick the British crown out of the 13 colonies? Because we wanted to control Virginia more than they did. Okay. That's why. And so what's happening right now is the other side is like, we don't care. 3 months ago, Joe Biden said he had no authority to issue a vaccine mandate. 3 months later, he just attempted to go ahead and do it. They don't care. I think we have to get this through our skull. Lyndon Johnson had a great line about politics. He said, power is where power goes. Okay. The reality is their side gets elected to do things. Our side gets elected to be something. And that's one of the major reasons why even when our side wins, we lose. Because we get elected. All right, how do I hold on to this office? How do I advance now that I'm here? Dude, Joe Biden's got Jimmy Carter times George W. Bush 2008 times Herbert Hoover approval ratings right now. They're showing no self-awareness, no self-regard, no hesitancy, no patience. They don't care. They're gonna jackboot you to your throat regardless, and then they'll just sit there and just lie and call their opponents racist in the election next year anyway.
Why do you think they
believe more in because they're not they understand that what they're pushing is not politics or an ideology. Yes. It's a religion. And they're more faithful adherents to it than we are to ours. That's why. That's
so true. So when I start to hear people, I'm not going to say any names, but governors that come out and say, well, we are constitutional conservatives and I know the limits on my power and I refuse to do what's right because of it. What should we do with people like that?
Throw them out. I mean, throw them out. In the Old Testament, God says through the prophet Ezekiel, that, you are my watchman on the wall.
Yes.
And if the Israelites fall into collective sin, even if you hold yourself upright, I will not punish you for their collective sin. But if you do not warn them of what they are about to embark upon, I will punish you as if you had sinned. See, this is your job. Your job is to defend our freedoms against all enemies, both foreign and domestic.
Yes.
We are not beholden to institutions that have abandoned that which used to bind us together. And to continue to pretend as if this is the right of center versus left of center argument about what is or what isn't constitutional from the 70s, 80s, or 90s is both naive. And secondly, it's also dangerous. You're up against something that just doesn't care.
And I said this, you said it perfectly previously, and I said it independent of that, which is the social contract's been dead for a while. It's a question of who is going to be more forceful in now governing the country to some sort of semblance of what we actually want to live in. Now, let me ask you, though, Steve, because most conservatives are getting very nervous when I talk to them about this. I honestly don't care like I used to. I go up to senators, and I'll be honest, I think maybe one or two senators get this. They still think that we live in a constitutional republic. They're like, things will come back and, they'll get back to the center and, this is really radical thinking and I don't want to be responsible for escalation. This is,
See, that's what they really think. It's not that they actually think that this is going to go back to the center. That's the last part.
No, they don't want to be blamed for whatever comes next.
Yes, they don't, and they're not willing to do what must be done. That's really the issue here. When I was on the Cruz campaign, can I give you a little inside baseball? Okay. When I was a senior strategist on the Cruz campaign, and we were trying to figure out how in the world do you defeat Donald Trump, which is basically like, how do you nail Jell-O to a door? Okay. And one of the things that I said to the other senior strategist and to the candidate is that, number one, we've got to read the room here. Okay. And I'll tell you the dumbest advice I ever gave on the Cruz campaign, which led me to this conclusion. There was the mini riot in Illinois. Trump had an event there for the Illinois primary.
Downtown
Do you remember this?
University of Illinois, Chicago.
Yep. Yes. All right. There was a mini riot there, and I was the first one to jump on our inside communications and everything else. See, this guy's too radical. He's pushing this. He's making things untoward. He's got this cultic like following that he just can instigate for just sheer political gain. And we ran out with that messaging that night, by the way. And our polling in Illinois before that event showed we had a real shot to pull that off. Within 24 hours, we had completely collapsed. We had misread the room because because even people that might have even thought those things about Trump still realized that the folks that were confronting Trump's followers at that event were far more of a threat to their way of life than even the most cultic of Trump following that you could stereotype. And we misread that room. And the conclusion I got from that horrible advice that I gave and the way that it blew up in our face is I gave an analogy to Ted and to the rest of the campaign. Most people would prefer that the Gary Cooper sheriff is the hero of the movie. The one you marry your daughter off to. Yes. The one that even the dad of the daughter's like, man, I wish I was more like that young man. Okay. They want that guy to be the hero. But when High Noon comes and goes and he never shows up for the confrontation and the banditos are still having their way over the town, eventually when Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider shows up, spaghetti Western style, do. And you know there's going to be some collateral damage. You know your windows are getting shot out too. You know that. But you know what? You're so freaking desperate that you take your family, you go to the basement floorboards, and you just stay there until the shooting stops. Because you know, even though this is more collateral damage than you're confident with, or you're comfortable with, you know when you get up and when you emerge back into the light, you're going to see a lot of dead bodies of those banditos. Yes. And so you're desperate and satisfied with the body count. We didn't figure this out. And I think that there are, for people that are like, I don't want an 80-year-old guy to run for president again. If you don't, you guys need to figure this out. Mm-hmm. The reason why people are waiting for him to return to politics is because there's a dearth of people not named Ron DeSantis who have figured out this is a freaking worldview cage view match. Okay. 2 worldviews are walking into that steel cage. Only one of them's walking out. That's right. Period. End of sentence. And until more people figure that out, you're going to get more of Donald Trump, whether you like it or not.
20 years ago, our world changed. We lost thousands of lives the horrific morning on September 11th and over the past 20 years since. Brave men and women in our first responder communities answered the call and rushed into the unknown as we watched in horror as the morning unfolded before our eyes. 343 firefighters were lost that day, and almost all our first responders who answered that call have perished since. Minutemen Coffee, being unapologetically patriotic and constitutionally based, honors all our men and women who serve and have served this amazing country. Minutemen Coffee is proud to partner with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation to bring to America the 9/11 Tribute Roast and honor all our first responders and military who have perished since 9/11. Give back and purchase the 9/11 Tribute Coffee, and all net proceeds will benefit those heroes whom this amazing foundation serves. Go to MinutemenCoffee/911.com. That's MinutemenCoffee/911.com. And I deal with these senators and I deal with governors, and I mean, they are they're weak, they're feckless, they're corrupt, Republicans, I mean. And I sit down with them, I try to walk them through this, and I either they're insulated or they have the willingness is a big one, and they're kind of like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. So it really also is incumbent on your listeners and my listeners to really raise the level of intensity here. Stop taking selfies with these people. Like, stop acting as if, go to their town halls that they have. They still have them, some of these representatives. And say to them, you don't understand. This country is falling apart. This ends in like 3 different ways. A free society, which is not going to happen anytime soon. We're going to be in charge, and our worldview will be dominant, or their worldview will be dominant. It's really that simple. It's one of those 3 ways. And so, Steve, what you're talking about is almost, it's dramatic. It's, some would say, radical, but we have to now be willing to escalate the conflict to ways that otherwise we never would before.
If we don't do this, this is my great fear, Charlie, is that I think the spirit of the age, malevolence that's driving this zeitgeist within some dark domains, what they really are trying to push us to is a civil war, a zero-sum game.
Absolutely.
And no one wins that. No one wins that. All right. To this day, more Americans died in Antietam than have ever died in any conflict ever fought in the history of this country. No one wins that.
Mm-hmm.
But the dark domain that's driving this loves that kind of carnage, and that's what it's rooting for. It's trying to create this sort of helpless dynamic. That if that happens, we have failed, because even in our eroding state, we still have more freedom and liberty and federalism at our disposal than any nation on earth does.
That's true.
The governments in France and Greece and Italy ignoring hundreds of thousands protesting every weekend, they don't have a governor of a state in Italy who will defy the feds and say, no, we'll do ivermectin here and no vaccine mandates. They don't have that. We can have that here. We have plenty of confrontational yet still peaceable means by which we can draw a line in the sand and say that poop ain't happening here anymore. Get the bleep out, or we'll reintroduce you to what the founders meant by tarring and feathering. Well, we can do that. But it's going to take a lot more will than we currently have, which is let me get fired up with my favorite conservative content and then wait to vote Republican every other year. It's going to take a little bit more of an effort than that.
Well, and I put together a list of things that could be done immediately. For example, the governor of North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas, they should just go rebuild the Keystone XL pipeline immediately.
Exactly.
Put them back to work. Make them go arrest the workers. They won't do it. They can't. And guard
why can the New York governor? Why can the New York governor call in 80,000 members of her National Guard to replace the 80,000 healthcare workers she's about to fire? But the Greg Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, can't put 80,000 National Guards people on the freaking border of the state. Why?
Because he doesn't want to. We know
because he doesn't want to.
Because it's a matter of the will, and it's not a matter of what actually needs to be done. But and I want to close with this. Are you seeing people wake up to this? I am. I'm seeing normal, everyday people. They are so disgusted.
I'm getting more emails and questions about school board elections than I have in my entire career.
Yes, but it also has to be part of it. Say, Charlie, what do? I say, go find your senator. Go dedicate a day to go find them. Like if you live in a state like North Dakota, where we're going to be broadcasting this on, go find them at the local grocery store and say, why are you such a joke? Like what country do you think you're living in exactly? Mm-hmm. You have the chemical castration of children, wide open border at the southern border. We're arming the Taliban. Google and Facebook are their own government within this country. We're on an inflation curve, teaching critical race theory in our schools. The two people that have actually done something good, Lieutenant Colonel Scheller and the guy that lifted the baby over the wire, are now being investigated or imprisoned by our military, yet Millie is going to live a nice life of luxury. What country do you think you're living in exactly?
Right. That's exactly right. A friend of mine, Jesse Kelly, another talk show host, has a saying, former Marine. And I think it certainly applies to this conversation. We better get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
See, you're up against Karens with a military. And they're totally fine invading your school board and your neighborhood and letting you know that they know the way you should live your life and raise your kids and what is right and wrong. And so there's only, and maybe it's just easier for somebody like me. I did not grow up in a good home. I grew up in one that was dysfunctional, had abuse. I had to stand up to my dad physically. I had to defend my mom against him. And so I didn't grow up in a good home. I didn't get a lot of, affirmation all the time. We moved a lot. I'm okay with being uncomfortable. I'm okay with not having a lot of friends and making people uncomfortable, but a lot of people aren't. And you're going to have to get out of that shell, because what you're up against is in their happy place, making you uncomfortable. So until you get that way, and instead of and we need to actually start with the people you're talking about representing us. There was a poll the other day that showed Gallup had a poll, the political breakdowns of people's thoughts on coronavirus. And a lot of people in our business on our side made a huge hay of the fact that 22% of Democrats think 50% of people who get COVID go to the hospital. Right, when the number's in the low it's actually in the single digits.
Yes.
Still, 16% of Republicans thought that.
Of course. Yes.
So what's more dangerous? The fact that 22% of people who watch Rachel Maddow believe this crap, or the fact that 16% of the people watching Tucker Carlson believe it? You know what I'm saying? Because I kind of think it's the latter, brother. All right. I mean, it's the people wearing our own jersey. Jesus said to love your enemies. I've said this to my audience the other day, Charlie. I'm not struggling not to hate the governor of New York or Randy Weingarten. I was a pagan for 30 years. I know what they're doing. I get it. I understand it. I'm opposed to it. I want to defeat it, but I'm not personally struggling with feelings of hatred for them. I'm struggling not to hate the wimps wearing my own jersey.
I totally
That's
agree.
who I'm struggling not to hate.
So last question. Some of the wimps on our side, the feckless, gutless wonders. They say this is all going to get better. The storm will pass. I think that this is I think this is peaceful and nice and serene compared to what's coming next. What do you think?
I think if the lesson I learned being raised by a bully is the only way to stop the bullying is to stand up to the bully. You cannot negotiate it. It's that great monologue that Donald Pleasance goes on in the first Halloween movie about Michael Myers: cannot be stopped, cannot be contained, cannot be killed. This is not going to be stopped by anything other than, get this now, stopping it, period. And that's a verb.
And most Republicans have no interest in that. They would rather make a bunch of money and live their elder years out in Wuhan or Singapore, which is seems to be Fauci and Bargain by Steve Deace. And Steve, you got to come back on. We have to do this monthly because not enough people are saying this, but I think more people are, which is really exciting. We have to take back the country. Okay. Any final thoughts?
Here's the final thought. The answer is us.
Mm-hmm.
We got here because collectively as a society for a generation, we abrogated our responsibility of self-government, beginning with the self. That's the bad news. But here's the good news. Since we're the ones that dug the hole, we're also the ones that can dig our way out.
That's an optimistic move. Do something, people. The country's falling apart. All right, Steve, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You bet, brother. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Email us your thoughts, freedom@charliekirk.com. And if you want to support our program, you can do so at charliekirk.com/support. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. God bless.
For more on many of these stories and news you can trust, go to charliekirk.com.